all here. This is the third installment of the Women's Impact Network Exponential Equity Webinar series. My name is Molly Pyle. I am the co-chair of WIN, and I am also a senior manager of our international summits. I'm currently reporting to you live from one of our summits in the Czech Republic right now, and I'm joined by an incredible co-chair, Stacy.
Hello, yes, thank you for that. I am Stacy Maldonado. I am the Senior Events Manager at SU, so I help execute our custom and special events at SU. And like Molly said, I am the second co-chair. We actually have a third co-chair who's not online today, but you'll be hearing about her more. So just to give you really quick, if this is your first time joining us, we are the Women's Impact Network, and we are here to promote gender equity and diversity and inclusion and empowerment of all people at SU. Let me take a deep breath. We started as an employee resource group about 4 years ago, and it's been a year now that we've relaunched as a global women's initiative. And so I am going to let Molly tell you a little bit about what our series is.
Yeah, so the Exponential Equity series is a webinar focused on all of the different variations of equity and what it can look like when it comes to race, gender, class, ethnicity, and everything in between, diversity, inclusion topics, and what are we doing? What does the world look like right now in terms of exponential technology solutions that can make our world more equitable and really help us build a better future? So we're super lucky to have had 2 webinars already, on our first in December on supporting survivors of sexual assault and what kind of technology-based solutions are out there in the world. We had Jess Ladd, the Project Callisto founder. And then we also had a webinar last February on entrepreneurship and how to make entrepreneurship more inclusive and opportunities for folks. So this is not just about gender, it transcends that and is really focused on equitable solutions for the future. And so we couldn't be more excited to have this webinar now on the future of work is emotionally intelligent. And we are joined by an incredible panel. You are really lucky with all of these speakers that we were fortunate enough to have confirmed. So we will let each of them introduce themselves now.
Rob, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump on. Hello, everyone. I'm Rob Nail. I'm the CEO and one of the associate founders of Singularity University. I am delighted to be here. And I just want to say thank you so much to Molly and Stacy for really championing this amazing cause and bringing us in a pretty incredible win week this week. There's been so many cool activities happening that you guys rock. So thank you so much for making this happen.
Thanks, Rob. Simone?
Thank you, Rob.
Good morning, beautiful humans. My name is Simone. I am a certified emotional intelligence coach and a trauma-sensitive mindfulness practitioner. I'm fairly new to the Bay. I call it the land of stimulation. I'm from the South. I'm from right outside of New Orleans. So I'm just happy to be here. And thank you all for inviting me.
Happy to have you. Melissa?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Eckstein. I am an organizational psychologist based in Brooklyn, New York. I have my own consulting practice where I use emotional intelligence as one of my main theories and approaches to the work. I've been involved with the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations for the last 15 years. So excited to bring that knowledge and experience to you all today. I'm also a part-time professor at the New School.
Great. Thanks for being here. Nicole?
Hi, my name is Nicole Bradford, and I am the co-founder and the executive director of the Transformative Technology Lab, where we look at tech to support mental health, emotional well-being, and human thriving, and also ways to support emotional intelligence. I'm also a GSP 15 grad, and so that's a long history with Singularity. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks all. So before we kick off, I want to just say a couple things because I got off on a rocky start. So I just wanted to say too that our big message is that even though this is a global women's initiative, that we try to have our events to be very inclusive, not just allies, but also we have a lot of remote staff. So we want to make sure that we include all of our staff. So we believe that everyone, regardless of what your gender is, has a big role in creating an equitable world. So I just wanted to make that point before we get started.
And sort of technical note, this webinar will be recorded. We're recording right now, and we encourage your questions in the chat. So please, this is an engaging dialogue with you. We'll ask a few questions to our panelists to really get the conversation going, but certainly feel free, ask all the questions you want, and we'll be taking them from the chat. And all of the webinars I mentioned before, and this one as well, are available on su.org. So definitely check it out, and we'll share more after as well, a follow-up email on resources, more ways to get involved. We welcome everybody and anyone interested in gender justice and the whole gamut of equity-based topics to join us in the Women's Impact Network. So open invitation, folks of all genders. Now, without further ado, Stacey, you think we should get this party started?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So to get us started, let's break down the basics. Can you tell us, what does the term emotional intelligence mean to you? And after that, or you could do it together. What does emotional intelligence mean to you? And what does the future of work mean to you? Melissa, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So the definition of emotional intelligence that I like to use talks about EI being the ability to both recognize and understand and manage our own emotions, and then recognize, understand, and influence the emotion of others. So it's really about yourself and about others, and the basis of all of that is self-awareness. So as for the future of work, I know it's a big conversation, has been for the last few years, but I really think of just some of the big questions. I know we have some ideas where it's going, but what kind of work will be available and needed? Who will be doing that work? What kind of competencies will be necessary for that work? Who will have emotional intelligence competencies in the future? Will it just be humans? How far will we take artificial intelligence? How do we manage that? How much do folks trust artificial intelligence? Will they, particularly if artificial emotional intelligence gets developed? And then what's the overall environment and context within which work is taking place, because that's always so influential. So those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
Great.
Awesome.
Nicole?
Well, so the classic definition of emotional intelligence is a combination of self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, relationship skills. And so when I think about those, and I think about the future of work, where we have this future where the automation line rises, a lot of rote things are being done by software. What is left is humans solving problems. Humans solving problems together is what a company is. It's what a community is. It's even what a family is. And so what's left with that is, like, how do we become really good at creating things and solving problems together? And that comes down to communication, collaboration, the ability to work together. And that sits on top of self-awareness, emotional self-regulation, basically all of the emotional intelligence things. And so the future of work really is a future of emotional intelligence for people to be able to work together. And then I think one of the things that's interesting, because of the area that I'm in, there's a lot of times where there's a lot of situations where people sort of say, isn't that really sad if we use technology to help us deal with our emotions or learn about our emotions? And my response to that is that emotions are natural, but emotional intelligence is a learned skill. And so to be resistant to the idea that there are tools that can help us learn emotional intelligence is along the same idea of sort of thinking that a baby should be born knowing how to speak complete sentences. We don't expect that to be true. We expect that it's something that you learn. And so the role of technology and emotional intelligence is really, what are the ways that technology can support us in having greater levels of self-awareness, maybe via our biosignals, having training into greater levels of self-regulation based on those biosignals. And then there's some really interesting things about, like, the bystander effect of technology, such as if there's a robot in the room who's expressing the inability to do something well, then the humans tend to converse more with one another and be more willing to experiment. And so there's lots of ways to bring these together for the future of work.
Great. Rob?
Sure. So I think I've lived by a bit of a mantra that if you can't bring the IQ, you better bring the EQ. And it's something I think I learned in college where I was a pretty good engineer and a pretty good designer, but I was also very good at finding people who are way better at me, just inherently, intuitively. They just were extraordinary. And there's just there was no way I was going to increase my mental capacity to the point of competing with them in any way. And what I quickly focused on was how do I better identify those people and work with them in new and better ways. And so it really was a bit of self-awareness early on where I've got some personal limitations that I'm going to have to navigate around where, you know, I may not be able to be the smartest person in the room, but I can maybe better understand who's in the room and how they operate. And that, you know, that's actually pretty important, specifically for the role of a CEO. Obviously, I'm the CEO of Singularity University, where I am completely surrounded by very intelligent, brilliant people left and right? I mean, I think there is, with staff and faculty, I think there is not a room that I enter in that I could say I was the smartest guy in the room, which is amazing for me, right? It's actually really fun to be always constantly challenged intellectually. And the role that I play as the CEO of the organization really needs to be one of better understanding the culture, the awareness, and really the emotional state of the business. And it has to start with me. And I had an early advisor who gave me some incredible advice, which I yet to this day I've somewhat failed on. It's something that I struggle with consistently. But his suggestion was, if you want to be a powerful CEO, one of the best skills that you could learn, the best classes you could take would be dramatic arts. You could learn to be an actor, because what actors perfect is this ability to understand emotional states and how they display and how they influence other people. And if you could become a master at that and always hold that space where you're constantly physically showing the emotional state that you want to resonate, you can be very powerful in helping people. And I am a great poker player, but a terrible actor. And so there's like, I think there's not a week that goes by that somebody won't make the comment to me, Rob, what's happening? It's like, is the company doomed? I'm like, no, I just have a really hard problem that I'm trying to figure out. And I'm just kind of walking around with a furrowed brow, and everyone just thinks the sky must be falling if I'm in such a weird state. I was like, no, I'm an engineer and I just like to work on problems. But it's interesting that sort of emotional connection is much, much more important in terms of how groups connect and how they work together. And so for me, it's a critical part of sort of my career path over the years. And it's something that I constantly have to remind myself of, and I expect and hope other people will remind me of as well, to help me grow as a leader in my role.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And I believe Simone.
Thank you. Such wisdom so far. It just shows the myriad of different ways that we can attack this topic, this juicy topic of emotional intelligence. I bring more of a practical definition of emotional intelligence. For me, emotional intelligence is the capacity to blend thinking and feeling so that we can better understand the feelings and behaviors that we're experiencing moment by moment. Whether we're aware of it or not, we're all emotional beings. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Our emotions are valuable signals that tells us the story of our experiences. So emotions carry important data. Emotions drive people. Like Nicole and Rob was mentioning, there's no turning off emotions, y'all. We're not robots. Well, at least I think some of us. I don't know, tech people, you know, all creating things. As far as I know, we all aren't robots. But no, there's no turning emotions off and on, especially when we go to work. Work is probably the place where we get triggered the most deal regarding emotional arousal. Spend a lot of time there, of course. It's like a family. So it's just that some people can more easily suppress like the form in which certain emotions show up. So for example, when I experience the feeling of frustration, I can more easily cry. And yes, I've cried at work shamelessly too. Others, when they experience frustration, they may yell or shut down entirely. But in both cases, our emotions are being expressed through our behaviors. And emotions eventually show up and dictate our behaviors. So we all have just moments of processing, suppressing, or venting our feelings and our emotions. But venting and suppressing feelings actually increase the intensity of the emotion and the stress in the workplace. So that's how I weave in, well, what's the future of work? Redefining well-being at work, because it's affecting us no matter what. What we're trying to do is slow down and pause enough just to become aware of it. So when we don't do that, we start to create like a dissonance between what is really happening and what we're really feeling. And that can really elevate stress. People start to walk on eggshells, trust and psychological safety is diminished among teams, and that actually increases conflict. So when we talk about future of work, we're talking about the well-being of work and how can we already find healthy ways to talk about what we're already experiencing and know that work is a safe place to do that because it's affecting us no matter what.
Thank you, Simone. That was beautifully said. And I actually would be remiss not to say, because you mentioned robots, Rob's background in robotics and given him his engineering skills and all of that jazz. I can actually confirm, though, he's fully human. All of us at SUR. Currently, just now. But
yeah,
I wanted to say,
for the moment.
wait till 2029. So no, but I wanted to mention too, it'd be remiss not to say, because you brought it up about crying at work, that one of the reasons that Rob is here, and I'm gonna just share this, Rob, that you really, as our CEO, showed up in a way for me recently to let me know, as you said, that it's okay to cry at work. And I was going through something, and just to hear you say that was so incredibly powerful. That our CEO believes that is just extremely validating, that the future of work can be something that's emotionally intelligent. So that's kind of a little bit about Rob being here, and I'm sorry, Rob, to share that without telling you I was going to, but no, I just so appreciated that, and I thought you added, to this conversation. Go ahead.
Thank you, Molly. I was assuming you were going to talk about the times that I cried at work, which there have been many. So, I mean, it's not, I try to lead by example as much as possible. But obviously, there's very constructive and appropriate times where that actually can be a powerful force of authenticity. And, again, I'm a bad actor, so it is very authentic if I get to that state. But I agree with you. Like we're humans. We're all working together, and the emotional side is a big part of it. And we have to accept that and figure out how to work with it the best we can.
Yeah, and just you modeling that, and then these experts on our panel talking about that, it's what I believe really makes it possible for us to bring this change into our world and create it in the future of work. So with that, I'm wondering if each of you can tell us a little bit about why you think that companies should invest in bringing more emotional intelligence into the workplace, and maybe why it's more personally important to you. And how about we start with Nicole?
Thank you for asking that question. So 2 parts to it. One, it's like why, what is the benefit for companies in bringing more emotional intelligence into work? And then 2, why is it personally important to me? On the first one, like what's the benefit is, I was talking to a really interesting company the other day. They're a Fortune 100 company, and they're doing a really interesting re-engineering where they've realized that in order to do what they need to do in the business, they have to change the way that they think about their human capital, which is like, I don't even know if that's the right word for it anymore. Human resources turned into human capital, and now I think it's going to turn into something else too. But they were talking about really making a change from seeing the people as a platform for the company to seeing a company as a platform for the people, and the amount of development that they would put into the people, because their research showed that for the type of business that they do and the type of innovation that they need, you know, they needed to switch from a model of sort of, you know, linear innovation to real disruption, and it's small teams that do that. So they realized that they needed to have a atmosphere of inspiration and creativity, but also unbossing the organization. So then they said, well, what do we need to do that? And it turns out that in order to have people feel really comfortable with being in an unbossed situation, the level of emotional intelligence that they have to have in order to, you know, give feedback to one another, to take feedback, to emotionally regulate, to deal with the fear of not having someone tell you what to do all the time, because that could be scary for some people just getting started on it. It actually was like they realized they needed to have an emotionally intelligent workforce in order to reach their business goals. And that's very interesting because historically, and Melissa, you can probably confirm this, but historically, this sort of thing about like, what do you do to develop the people? It was something, you know, on the side. And so before I actually started with transformative tech, I've worked with the largest cosmetics company in the world. I worked at one of the largest entertainment companies in the world. And then I worked for the largest video game company in the world before I started doing this in senior roles. And so, you know, I've been in the organization where it was really clear that people had good intentions about how this personal development or transformative or these things that historically were where emotional intelligence lay, they were off to the side. And now I think what we're seeing is that it's really starting to get integrated as companies are realizing that to actually meet their business goals, they have to get people to act in this way in order to get the kind of disruption that they need. So that's interesting and that's exciting. And then for me personally, why, you know, I think it's relevant is because, you know, I'm, you know, bottom line, I'm on Team Human. Like that's the team that I'm on. And you know, and a lot of my work has to do with, you know, it's transformation. It's sort of like, what is the process of people having mental and emotional health and happiness, having emotional intelligence, and then actually, you know, expanding their consciousness ultimately in order to like, what is the next step for humanity? And the reason why work is essential and cities are essential and schools are essential is because that's where the people are. You know, there's some of these large companies have 200,000 employees or more. And so if you can reach through the companies and support them in their change, then you actually get to help a large number of people change. And the timing is right because that's actually what they need to do their work. And so this is a very exciting time, and it's personally interesting to me because I think for the goal of being on Team Human, bringing emotional intelligence into work is actually one of the ways that we save humanity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
I
love it. Well, we go there here at SCU, so it's all good. Melissa, since you were mentioned, would you like to chime in next?
Sure. Thanks for starting that off, Nicole. I think I'll just build on what you already shared. So at this point, there's about 30 years of research on emotional intelligence and its application. So we actually know a lot about it. And Nicole, like what you said, there's a really strong business case at this point for emotional intelligence and using it in organizations. We know it makes a difference in performance. When you look at the star performers in an organization, it's not IQ that makes the difference. It's not personality that makes the difference. It's actual emotional intelligence competencies. So if you're at the bare minimum thinking about the bottom line for an organization or a company, all of the research points to how critical having emotional intelligence and the folks who are working for you are, having an emotionally intelligent culture that supports folks to be that way, having emotionally intelligent leadership, like we were talking before with Molly and Rob, that kind of modeling. And so not only do we know how important emotional intelligence is, but we know that you can learn emotional intelligence. You know, everyone's born with some kind of capacity for this, right? Like we're all born with different capacities. and talents in different areas, but we can all improve our emotional intelligence too. And so the opportunity is there to do, more learning, development, modeling within organizations. There's plenty of programs that have been piloted and studied out there that are effective. But it takes time, but the investment can only pay you back in multiples. It's a real kind of investment in the future, since we're talking about the future of work. So that's kind of the business case. I think for me personally, similar to Nicole, what you were saying, it just feels critical to having humane, healthy workplaces. This webinar is part of a series thinking about diversity and inclusion. So I've been thinking about the connection there, and to have inclusive workplaces, to be able to actually support diverse workplaces, we need to be able to see and understand each other's different experiences, and respect each other, and be open to hearing where folks are coming from. I think that's the foundation of all that work. And so how can you possibly do that without being emotionally intelligent, without being aware of your own reactions, your own feelings and biases, and just being able to work with that. And then, the next most important emotional intelligence competency on top of self-awareness is really empathy. And so how can you really fully put yourself in other people's shoes and hear and understand and validate where they're coming from, and take it from there.
Absolutely.
So I'll stop there, but great questions. Thanks for posing them.
Of course. Rob, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. I guess I would echo everything that was just said about how critical emotional intelligence is in the workplace. And I think that a very truly inclusive environment will have a lot of people who have very low emotional intelligence, and it's okay. You can actually figure out ways to compensate and create structure for that as well. It's not easy, but it's an interesting challenge to explore. And because I think, everyone has something special that they can potentially offer. It's just a matter of the conditions and the intentions around that. The thing that I think is actually really fun and something that we explore at SU quite a bit is on the technology side. We are building capabilities where the robots actually do have emotional intelligence from the standpoint of their ability to recognize our emotional states potentially better than we can. So there's a handful of different things that you can play with. One of the companies that I've actually I personally invested in, they're in the SU community, is a company from Israel called Beyond Verbal, which basically tracks and analyzes vocal intonations, and it's language independent, but they can very accurately identify your primary and secondary emotional states based on your voice. And this is something that they are working with a lot of big telephone bank service centers, customer service representatives, and others, where you can now use these tools to potentially quantify some of the emotional levels that are being expressed from other people, such that you can better and more specifically decide what to do about it. And it's an interesting thing where we've always thought that the emotional side is this like fuzzy, unquantifiable, intangible thing. But actually, we can figure out ways to be very specific to figure out where the lines and how to quantify that in ways that we can actually learn, improve, and create systems and technologies that can better support us in our endeavors to be more emotionally intelligent in a workplace. So those are really fun things to look at. I would also suggest that, if my Apple Watch was pinging me when I was expressing a little bit of agitation in my conversation with someone, that probably would be a valuable reminder, real time, that because I'm emotional and I'm not seeing it happening, but it hears my voice, and it could actually alert me before anyone else may even notice. That could be a powerful sort of capability, a bit of a superpower that would really help me dramatically. So I think there's a lot of fun opportunities there in the technology space to actually help better equip, teach us, and complement our own emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And last but most certainly not least, Simone, what would you like to add to that? As this is really a huge cornerstone of your work, is it not?
Yes, definitely. And I really like the way that the panelists are tying in the technology with it, because it goes along exactly what I've learned, integrated in through actual experience. It's like everyone, emotions are vital data. It's actually data. So that even using those terms in a way how it compares and how tech can actually help us with it. It's energy in our bodies. They're like our cheat code to understanding our reactions to our experiences and the reactions of those around us. So when we have the right tools to help us dissect these experiences, we gain like access to information that helps us understand our patterns of behavior, that help us thrive and understand also those patterns of behavior that keep us in the loops of stress, shame, guilt, especially in the workplace. So, which that definitely adds to more mistakes and conflicts among teams. So having EQ helps us to make more optimal decisions in the long run. So studying emotions and emotional intelligence help us to become more aware, like others have mentioned, more intentional and more purposeful. And so these are, we all know these are very successful traits in order to connect with others and follow our passions and our purpose. But when we disconnect from those emotions, or we don't have a little, like Rob is saying, we don't have that something that can help us as a little alarm to say, hold on, can you slow down? Can we pause right now? Something is happening. Can I pause in this moment to realize that something is happening? When we disconnect from that, our decision-making is actually impaired. And so when leaders practice emotional intelligence, they access wisdom in the moment to what is truly needed among their teams as well. So in turn, they can better connect to people in critical relationships around them. This becomes a superpower for leaders who want to bridge like sustainable change and growth amongst employees, and to be a staple in the ecosystem of business, because the ecosystem of life is changing. Work is changing. The country is changing. It's ever evolving, and that's a good thing. That's what we want. We want to evolve. We want to change. We want to renew the ideas, tell new stories. Just like when Molly said, when Rob made that connection with her, it was a felt sense in her body. She felt it made an impression on her, to where when the first time I met her, she told us that story. It's a code in her body now. It helps her build trust. And so that's very important when we go into diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations, because those could be very difficult conversations. So that foundation of trust is very important. So that's why emotional intelligence is just so yummy to me. It's just like, oh, and we can have technology to help us. That's dope. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Yes. And you couldn't have said that more beautifully. And the convergence really of what we talk about a lot at Singularity University, the technologies, the exponentials, and what is possible in the future, and how this is such an integral part of all of that. It's just really exciting to have this conversation.
I would add too that I come from a public policy nonprofit world where I was encouraged to bring my full self, and my hesitation to going into corporate was that you're very like, you kind of live a double life. You have to keep your personal life separate from your professional life, and so that was kind of like my idea of what it was to go into corporate, and just being at SU and being in corporate and being in tech, and just having this conversation. Like, I never thought, maybe 5 years ago, I didn't think that it'd be possible to bring both together. So if you could talk about specifically to a company's culture in corporate, how do you think that increased emotional intelligence can contribute to it, contribute to changing the company's culture, and what role does tech play in that? And I'm gonna let that be open to whoever wants to tackle that question first.
Okay, well, a couple of things that I want to put out there. One, if you look at what the younger cohorts or the people who are coming into the workspace, what they want, they actually don't want to split their identities anymore. That was a little bit more common before, where people felt like they had to, and I think the corporation in some ways demanded it. But now, what's exciting about right now, as it relates also to culture, is that there's a convergence of need, demand, and means around human development, and in this case, what we're talking about, emotional intelligence. And so the employees that are going to very soon make up the bulk of the workforce, millennials, I don't like that term because I'm a perennial, new every year. But that generation and below, they don't have any intention of bifurcating who they are. And so they're demanding a higher level of authenticity, and in the next 5 to 10 years, they will be the managers. At the middle level managers. And then if you look at some other corporate transformation studies, the companies that are the most successful are also the ones where they have a strong sense of meaning and purpose, but it isn't just the meaning and purpose of the CEOs or the C-suite. It is a sense of meaning and purpose along that middle management layer, because they're the ones that are actually really touching everyone. And I think the ability to actually know what your purpose is and to have a sense of meaning, I think that also goes back into the level of emotional intelligence you have, because that ties to how much noise is in your head on a daily basis that prevents you from having empathy, prevents you from knowing what your feelings are, prevents you from, being intelligent in the moment, prevents you from, as Simone says, pausing before you're about to fly off the racket. That is a function of a level of noise. So it's all really tied together, and it's very much tied to culture. And, for anyone who thinks that, I assume that, if someone's on this webinar, they're into it. But for the people, when you all go back to your organizations and you talk to people about this, this is a change that cannot be resisted. Like, it is coming because it's what the rising generation wants. And so what we really have to think about is, how do we make it skillful? Because emotional intelligence is a skill. The ability to have mental health is a skill, unless there's, biological issues. The ability to have emotional health is a skill. Happiness is a skill. There's a lot of things that people think are, as Rob said, warm and fuzzy, when they're actually skills, and that's all trainable. And if something's trainable and teachable, then there's a role for technology.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'll jump in since you referenced me. Thank you so much, beautiful. That was excellent. That's exactly goes along with something that brought to my mind when I was given this question. Most people frequently run on autopilot, like Nicole is saying, reacting unconsciously based on habit. The brain is wired to form and follow new neural pathways. So the brain's pattern of activity, the brain actually loves that. It's really good at keeping a pattern. It's a form of protection created by the conditioned mind. So, however, left unconscious, patterns can inhibit our optimal performance because instead of reacting to what is needed in the moment, we're reacting to more of a generalized response than something that's new and tailored to that current situation. So emotional intelligence practices and tools help us to recognize those patterns by slowing down, getting into the moment, and we can shine the light on blind spots that we all have, especially with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And there's many companies like Nicole's company that tells us about how tech can help us develop tools to help us support that process of retraining the brain. I went to this conference about a week ago that was called the Reframe Conference. It was the Neurodiversity Project. Now talk about fancy. Kamal Sinclair, she's the director of Sundance New Frontier Lab, and she works on the Neurodiversity Project. And she says she quoted, she said, "Story is the code for the operating system of humanity." We're all telling stories. We're all retelling a specific story. That code has been imprinted on us since birth. And so I love the way how we can look at this and make it a non-personal thing. It's something that it's an impression on us. Emotions is energy in our body, and it's not personal. So when we look at emotions, we can look at emotions as our emotional code of our body, and it tells us, and it gives us so much information, and it can help us create things that we're not even thinking of because we're so used to doing things a certain way. So that's when I think of autopilot and slowing down the limitless possibilities of what we can develop when we access that emotional code.
I'd love to jump in if I can. There's a great question on the chat here about remote workforce, which I think is a really, really interesting consideration as more and more companies are faced with a workforce that wants to be virtual. And in fact, that's typically much more productive. And, you know, we are talking about forecasts that over the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to see 3 to 5 billion more people come online who are going to be looking for jobs, and they're going to be virtual. And so I'm curious about just the perspective from the other panelists, whether there are different kinds of emotional intelligence required from a remote workforce. Because I think there could be, right? If you're just responding through chat and Slack, you actually have a nice filter that you can manage, and you don't have to deal with all the face-to-face, but it's probably limiting regarding the kinds of roles that you can actually play. So I'm curious if anybody has any interesting insights on that.
I will jump in. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about. So thanks for teeing it up, Rob. A lot of my clients are virtual these days, so I think about this all the time. And I think what's interesting is kind of the ways tech can get in the way of us connecting with each other and the ways it can aid that. And I think both options are on the table, and emotional intelligence can be one of the ways we mediate that and even figure out how to navigate that kind of minefield. So in situations where you're using email more, I think it can be really easy to be impulsive in your responses and not take that pause time that we've been talking about to process your own emotions, to even realize you might be having an emotional reaction. It's so easy, just send that email back out in the world. So that's something I work on with coaching clients and other folks a lot, of just how to step back and take that moment. So that's one example. I think, you know, when you're on Slack all the time or you're just chatting, emotional intelligence can really help you notice a moment where you've got to step away from that and step back and actually get on a call with someone, pick up the old-fashioned phone, get on a video conference, and actually connect with people as humans, because you're not able to connect in that same way, I think, always just through writing. You know, some of the research on employee motivation talks about 3 main things that motivate people. And it's autonomy, feelings of autonomy, being able to feel confident in what you're doing, and relationships are the 3rd one. And so all of the different ways we build relationships, I think, are important. And I do think that's changing with younger generations. They are more used to and more comfortable building relationships online. But, you know, there's a lot of anxiety and issues along those lines too, with that seem to come along with less human interaction. So I think balancing the two is really going to be critical as we move forward. You know, and I think some of the positive ways tech can help us, you know, we've already been talking about it. People have been developing apps for a while, specifically around developing emotional intelligence. You know, it's a huge field out there. And tech, you know, here we are in a webinar, we're all able to connect with each other using video. It's kind of amazing. You know, in the chat, there's been all kinds of people chiming in from Brazil. So tech can support this relationship building too, I think, in so many ways.
Awesome.
Beautifully said. A friend of mine, a young entrepreneur, that's really funny. It made me think of something. A young entrepreneur I know had an app that was called On Second Thought. And basically it was a thing that sat on top of your deck that slowed any of your text by like 5 minutes. And it was really popular with college students. So you could actually like get it back, and cancel it, but you could have the release of the moment, which I thought was kind of funny. Probably, emotional intelligence would help with that. A couple of things that I consider a transformative technology that, I track, but it's not obvious, for our sector that I would track that is one, I'm really looking forward to hyper-realistic avatars. We really need to get the microfacial expressions into the digital avatars for VR, AR, and everything else. It's okay with, this, you can see a little bit, but we have 122 facial expressions and we consciously recognize 9. But I think the reason why social, it can be such a cesspool is that people don't get the feedback loop on flat social. And so they say things to people that they would never say live. And so, I think, not too long from now, we're going to see VR meeting rooms. We'll have VR-based meeting rooms, we'll have holographic meeting rooms, and the extent to which we can get those microfacial expressions into the avatars, I think that's going to just clear up a lot of misbehaving, because we, on the other side, we have a really long period of evolution that makes us look for those signals. And so that, I think, will be one of the things that will help with distance working a lot. It will just basically just leapfrog the problem, to the next level. I think that's one.
Hey, Nicole, I'll just throw out there that High Fidelity, which is Philip Rosedale's new platform, is something you can experiment with, where he's actually leveraging new platform capabilities and better cameras to actually capture your facial expressions and hand expressions in that virtual avatar. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a big step forward from what currently exists. And I will, from my experience using that and from trying all the different platforms, in person, when you can reach out and actually physically touch them is a pretty massive, it's going to be hard to replicate that level of intimacy in any kind of a digital virtual world, right? And I feel like that's what we're all striving to get to in the virtual world. But until we have that, there's always going to be this knowledge in the back of your mind that it's not really real. I can fake this and it's still digital, and I won't actually hurt the person because I can't actually touch them physically and hurt them. And I feel like there's still going to be this virtual barrier that we're going to keep striving to overcome. But I would love to do the next WIN workshop in High Fidelity. We should actually get everybody to jump in and have that experience and cool. See what that would be. It's ready. We can talk and set that up for the next one. It's actually a fun experiment to run. Great.
Yeah, I really I've spent some time on High Fidelity, and I agree with you. I think it's I think it's awesome, and I do agree with you. I think that nothing replaces the in-person. And so when I think a lot about these types of technology, especially the ones for emotional intelligence, it's, the extent to which you can use technology to help a human turn down the noise inside of themselves. So when they actually arrive in a human to human situation, they're actually able to be there, authentically, with presence and skillfully, as well. And I think, none of this stuff is going to be binary. We're going to have a lot of different tools for different situations. And, to the extent that we're forced to work remotely, what are all of the things that, can help us with that?
I'm feeling like we should do a part 2 here, and we can do it in High Fidelity, which would be awesome. So love it. And it was a great actually comment and question in the chat, and it was something we wanted to ask anyway, which is a little bit more on the how. So how can someone become more emotionally intelligent? And also, how could a company become more emotionally intelligent? The human and the corporate ultimately evolving into greater levels of emotional intelligence. What does that look like? Or tactically, what can we do? I have a feeling Simone might have some answers.
Oh, you're so emotionally intelligent, Molly. You could feel that I'm thinking that. First step, just integrating contemplative or mindfulness practices. First step is to be able to slow down enough to even realize that our emotions are not turning off. We're ruminating constantly on thoughts and feelings. So incorporating those types of programs or practices that work, whether it's just with resource groups or actually calling in external facilitators or teachers that teach these types of practices. Practices like meditation help us to slow down and activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the system that conserves energy, of course, and slows down the heart rate. And I've actually had technology that I experienced technology that helped me with this. So this is important because in order to catch those emotions and thoughts, we need to slow our system down enough, internally and externally, so that we're looking at what's underneath the surface and not just what's on top of the surface. So quiet sitting or meditation is a mind and body practice that has a long history used for increasing calmness and physical relaxation. And so meditation is just not for yoga or Zen monks or, yeah, it's for everyone. It's scientifically proven, along with spiritual aspects of the meditation and the stillness and that sacred pause, or we call it in the spiritual world. So yeah, there's a myriad of different practices. So there's journaling, there's mindful listening, and there's tons of corporate programs and organizations that can come in and help and start with those programs. So those are just a few to get started, but being in flow, that's another word for it. Stillness and calm, being in flow where you can pause. It can come up in different ways. I like to go drumming. That's one thing that actually helps me to get into flow. So there's a lot of different ways to practice this.
Awesome. So anyone else? Yeah, Melissa, please.
Yeah, I can jump in and say a little more about some of the corporate programs that Simone you're referring to, and what the research has told us at this point. So number one, I think this got mentioned earlier, but there are ways to assess your emotional intelligence. So if you're trying to build your self-awareness, that can be a great position to start from, to even, sometimes we think we're really great in this area and not so great in the others. And you do a 360, you find out what other folks around you perceive, and you realize, don't quite have it right. Maybe there's some areas that you could work on developing that you didn't realize, right? So just starting with a kind of assessment and check-in can really help. I think companies and organizations can create and encourage participation in all different kinds of EI development programs, depending on what's the right cultural fit for their organization. So that could be on an individual level. You can bring in executive coaching. You could create peer coaching programs, which is a great way to leverage resources and create either pairs or small groups of peers within the company to be able to help develop each other's work. And then, there's all kinds of steps that we've learned about how do you do behavior change, right? Like, how do you make that happen and how do you support that in an organization? So things like starting with motivation, getting people excited about this stuff, encouraging and providing learning and letting people actually practice, right? We keep talking about that all this stuff takes time and practice. So creating an environment where it's okay to make mistakes and to try out new behaviors and techniques and ways to integrate, things like meditation into the workplace, playing around with that, thinking about what might be some constraints within an organization that get in the way of people being able to be emotionally intelligent, and think about how might you remove those, and then continuing to build a culture of learning and personal growth and providing feedback, right? So if you're helping people assess their emotional intelligence to start with, giving them a chance to learn and grow, you're going to have to find ways to give them feedback and help continue that growth trajectory along the way. And again, making that acceptable, okay, not particularly tied to, performance evaluations and feedback, really keeping this individual development piece separate. and giving people the space and freedom to grow.
I'll add a couple of things. Melissa, I think your point about being able to create that awareness in the culture that actually values that is a great, important first step. One thing that I've seen that's become more of a norm around just tracking emotional intelligence, and this actually may go back to the remote work question, is, you know, at SU internally, pretty much all internal conversations are on Slack. So we use Slack maybe to a fault in some cases. But, you know, with sort of texting and short messaging, it's very hard to read when somebody is being sarcastic, right? And so the use of emoticons is exactly what solves that problem, right? And so it's become just basically a standard norm. Like if it's sarcastic, you know, you kind of put the funny face on there, and then people they understand. If you don't put the funny face on there and use all caps, it really means something, right? So this is like socially accepted structure that we already use that actually captures a lot of our intention and our emotions around those topics. And there's probably a way to explore that and be more proactive and intentional about that, and potentially maybe more productive too. The other thing that we have used, and I'm very excited to explore further, is actually incorporating EEG headsets. So these are basically pretty low level sensors that you can put a headset on, and it reads your alpha and beta waves from your brain. And we've one of our new partners, Kyle Nell, he did this at Lowe's Hardware, where he worked at the innovation team for many years. And now we've been incorporating it in our programs. So in our week-long exec program, we'll have 4 or 5 participants in the class wearing these headsets as they're experiencing the workshop or the speaker or whatever it may be. And we're effectively reading their cognitive engagement, their emotional levels from the actual levels coming off of their brain, which is a very specific quantified view of how they're responding to whatever is happening. It's not super high fidelity, but directionally it's really interesting and accurate, and in a way that's different than what they would describe to you in a survey or how they would describe what they're actually experiencing. And it gives you a way to sort of create different kind of relativity between different people. So one of the things that we've done with some of the faculty members is give them that feedback is, hey, when you say this phrase, the participants tune out. They just like point blank don't understand what you're talking about, which is really powerful, right? Or when you use this phrase, it freaks them out, right? They're scared. They don't know how to deal with it. So actually being able to quantify the response of what other people are hearing through these technologies is a superpower, right? That we actually are playing with. So I'm excited to see where that kind of capability expands and how we can better use it potentially internally for training and just general awareness. And so it's a really fun tool to explore different things with.
Well, that's so interesting. There's this one product that I love called Pavlok that basically it's a haptic thing. And they have a Slack integration that allows you to send attaboys through the Slack. So if you send someone a compliment and you put like a little symbol on it, it actually makes the device on their wrist kind of purr. And so people can feel how it doesn't do downs, it only does up. So people can feel when the organization is loving on them, which I think is kind of cool.
Does anyone else want to add to that question or anything that's been discussed so far?
Yeah, there's one thing I'd like to say in closing where people sort of touched on it a little bit is that, ultimately human beings are story-driven creatures. And that comes from, passing down what's important to us around a fire, in the middle of the nowhere. And so I think also it's like, what is the story of where being a whole human fits into the organization? So I run a global community in 70 countries and 450 cities of just people who want to build transformative technology. And one of the things that we have integrated into our culture is that you build what you are. And so you can only build something to the level of consciousness that you have. Like, you're going to build what you are. Whoever you are, that's what you're going to build. And so a quarter of our content is personal development and transformation content, because these are really powerful technologies. Someone in the chat talked about privacy. Like, these are really powerful technologies, and who you are in the mental, emotional, and I would also say spiritual, in terms of like self-awareness, maturity that you have, does everything about what you will build and whether or not you will have the maturity to be at the trailhead of an unintended consequence and know that that's where you're at, right? And so I think also a big part of it is like, what is the overall story? And what's exciting about this topic as it relates to startups, to corporations, to, you know, civic life in general, is that we're at a place where, you know, the need, demand, and means are coming together, and now it needs to be tied to a story, you know, and sort of like a narrative that ties it to culture in a way that people can see that it's for them. And what I've seen from our experiment is that, you know, people are embracing it dramatically as a way to have agency in this crazy world, to be able to do their part for, you know, being on Team Human through their departments, because we also have a lot of corporate innovators, through their large organizations and also through the startups that they're building.
So this has all been really
Awesome.
interesting. You've provided great insight on the technology and how this is having implications in the workforce. Can you share maybe a specific example where, an example where you've seen emotional intelligence in action at work, and how did that lead to a good outcome? So we've talked a lot about the how, the why, but maybe giving some examples could really bring it full picture. Or if you can think of a good example, you could also alternatively think of an example where there was a lack of emotional intelligence and where it could have been handled very differently.
I just talked, but I have a great example. So I'll make it really tiny, tiny, tiny. I was recently talking to an entrepreneur who has an app that serves young people, you know, it helps them with mental health, emotional well-being, and they were exploring the decision on whether or not they were going to whether or not they were going to mine the journals, because there's a journal entry section of like these young people, and they decided not to. But it was a big conversation in the company, because it's like, how can we serve better? You know, since this population has a high issue of a high incidence of suicide, like, would we be serving better if we actually did mine their journal entries, you know, for keywords? And so, as a classic case of emotional intelligence, one, the emotional maturity that comes from emotional intelligence, to know that they needed to like really talk about it and not go wholeheartedly into it just because they could. And two, they had big differences of opinion, and everybody, like, if you work at this company, like, you really care about people. So there were none of this, you know, it was none of sort of like, it wasn't like Axiom, you know, mining our data. It was like really concerned people. And so they had the ability to like have this conversation. And in the end, they decided not to do it. But they didn't automatically decide they weren't going to do it out of like an extreme rights, you know, standpoint. And they didn't automatically decide to do it because they could. They used their emotional intelligence to have a conversation that really took to heart the people that they were really serving, and whether or not it was the right decision to make. And it was like such an emotionally intelligent display. You know, I think incredibly emotionally intelligent.
I can go next. So I was thinking about a personal experience I had where I was trying to make organizational change within a nonprofit. And so I was working with an organization that gave away small grants to human rights organizations, mostly small grassroots organizations. And so we were trying to implement a new evaluation system and make evaluation more formalized, more of a standard part of how staff did their work. And it was rolling around along great. And when it came time to folks actually integrating this into their workflow, it just wasn't happening. No one was doing what they said they would do. No one was doing what we agreed to. And so it was a moment for me to pause and say, what is going on here? What's getting in the way? You know, people are saying one thing, doing another. And so what I ended up doing was creating some space to try and surface, how are people feeling about this? What was going on? I just knew something was happening at probably a primarily unconscious level that was getting in the way of us implementing this change. And so what surfaced were people's fears, you know, and some were rational and some were irrational. It didn't matter, but that's what was getting in the way of people following through on the plans we agreed to. They were afraid if they evaluated the grants they were giving and the organizations that they had given the grants to, you know, something that wasn't successful, that somehow they would have to stop funding these groups that they really cared about and they thought were doing really important work in the world. And so just by having that space for people to voice their concerns, let them out, realize that they weren't alone in these feelings, and talk through it, really helped us turn a corner in terms of moving forward, realizing we had to work with these feelings, we couldn't deny them. And, you know, it just really got us over a hump to taking steps forward. So, you know, that was a moment where I felt like I both used my emotional intelligence to help this change happen, but also encouraged other staff to tune into their own feelings and increase their own awareness of what was getting in the way and where they were at with this change.
I can jump on on a couple pretty specific things that I guess I've trained my team around. This happens quite regularly where we'll walk into a meeting and one of the first questions is, Rob, did you actually eat lunch today? Because I don't want to have a meeting with you unless you actually had lunch. Because they know, like, my emotional capacity and decision-making ability, it changes a little bit whether I'm, like, my blood sugar level is at the right level. And that's an amazing awareness that they recognize. And I'm very open about it. Like, we joke about it a lot, but it's a real thing. And it actually does have an effect. We also know that scheduling a really hard, difficult, emotional, or cognitive problem at the end of the day isn't the best idea. Because by the end of the day, like, there's been so many things that we've worked, the context switching between different issues. The end of the day for me is tough. It's like now it's a slog and it's just not as productive. And so there's ways that we've created norms around when we meet, how we meet, and the topics that we meet around that are actually enhance our productivity quite dramatically. And that's sort of something that we've just sort of developed. And we could probably be even more proactive around. But that's been a very important part of my day-to-day activities.
Awesome.
Brilliant.
I'll jump in with
wait, I think so.
Thank you. Just a personal experience as well. My emotional intelligence, just like everyone, you have to practice it every day, every single day. Especially helped me with self-compassion. That's a big practice for me, to notice that inner critic, you know, the one that all of us have, the one, that voice in our head that's telling us to work harder, you could have done better, oh, do more, oh, these people are going to fire you, you're not doing a good job. The emotional intelligence practice that I do helps cultivate that self-awareness and self-compassion. I work with organizations, that go into companies to teach emotional intelligence, and I talk about diversity, equity, inclusion on the systems level. And one of my colleagues, we actually have a workshop that's coming up. And I noticed every single time that we would get together to develop the curriculum, there with that inner critic show right up. did you do all the slides? Did you do all the work that you're supposed to do to get together? And I teach this stuff. And it's an everyday practice. So it's one of those things where emotional intelligence, it's everyday work. And there's no experts in emotional intelligence for me. I know what's best for me, you know what's best for you, and you can become your own expert with practice.
I'm going to add a piece, even though I'm a panelist, I'm just a moderator here, but I could really speak on that. As we could tell, I kind of stumbled a little bit at the beginning because I get really in my head and I'm just like, am I saying the right thing? Am I really getting the right message? Even though I had gone through my head, I know what her mission is, I know what her vision is. But something that I really appreciate from my colleagues here at SU is that they really accept me and they encourage me to say, you know, and I think it's that self-awareness of I know when I'm nervous and I know when I'm not being my full self. And when I share that, everyone at our company they really show me love and support, and they encourage me to continue doing the work that we're doing, even though if like speaking in public isn't my forte. So I just wanted to add that special point. Like I said, the reason why we are talking about emotional intelligence is because it's really something that we're passionate about. It's really ingrained in our values in the Women's Impact Network.
And Stacey, I appreciate your humility in the beginning when you said, I want to take a breath. That was emotional intelligence in action, and that's just beautiful. Great model. You're doing good, girl.
Great, thanks. So let's see. Do we want to choose a couple questions from the audience, Molly?
I would love to chime in if I could.
Sure.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing, and I'm sorry if my internet's a little spotty, I'm reporting to you live from the Czech Republic at our summit, but interesting, one of our speakers, actually, Taddy Blecher on the Future of Education today, was talking about how the World Economic Forum is sharing a list of the skills you need to succeed in 2020 and beyond for the future of work. And in order to be prepared, they put together this list of 10 skills, and emotional intelligence is on that list. And I'll share the Forbes article that says that. I just think that's really validating to this conversation. And one of our panelists one of our audience members asked a question about how do we take this and teach our kids to prepare them for the future of work and to become more emotionally intelligent. And I think that's an awesome question, because the future of work is really something not only all of us will experience, but our children and future generations to come. So what does it look like for them, and how do we teach and model it as
we might have lost Molly.
Yeah, I can just say a little bit about that, which I've seen. This has been a huge push, at least since I've been in the emotional intelligence world. It's been in the school system. And so I think we are already developing generations of kids with a lot stronger emotional intelligence and social intelligence competencies than, you know, collectively we've had in the past. You know, I see it in friends' kids and just the way they're able to jump on an emotion that they see in a very different way than sometimes the adults even, right? So they'll notice a feeling before the adult even realizes they're having it. That's a little scary, but also really cool and exciting because, you know, the earlier folks are developing these skills and these competencies, the more they're going to bring it to everything they're doing in the world, in particular the workplace. So there are organizations, you know, if people are interested. CASEL is one, CASEL.org. They've been doing this work for years, lots of research, lots of good resources. And I see, you know, school systems slowly getting on board. You know, some of the tragedies that the school systems in our country have unfortunately had to be dealing with. What I'm seeing in the responses is a real push for social and emotional intelligence support and development as a way to try and shift the culture that's going on in schools, and make everyone, safer and healthier. But it's definitely still, I think there's a lot of room for advocacy around this out there in the community. We get afraid, we want security, but building up the emotional intelligence piece, I think is equally, if not more, foundationally important. So those are just some thoughts on it.
Just a quick comment, I would just use the cliche, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. We can't teach what we don't understand or we don't know or we don't have. So first, to just be that model of practicing emotional intelligence. Your kids will pick that up. They are intelligent beings. They were born emotionally intelligent. We domesticated out of them. So they will pick it up as long as you practice it and you shift your own culture.
I'll jump in on sort of future of work and education. It's something I'm very passionate about. I've been talking pretty publicly for a couple of years now about my own personal list of the skills that I am trying to equip my two little kids with as complementary to the school and everything else they're experiencing. And I'll start with just thinking about the future that I know my kids are about to experience. The next 30 years for them looks nothing like the past that I experienced. And the examples that I usually just throw out there is that I know they're not going to learn how to drive a car. So my kids are 5 and 2. So autonomous cars will be fully in place well before they're thinking about driving. And they're definitely not going to go to college. Not anywhere near the way that I went to college. I'm absolutely certain of that. And they probably will go to space. And they may very well live to be 150 or older. And they are absolutely going to be interacting with technologies that we can't even imagine yet. And so the superpowers and capabilities that they're going to be interacting with are profound. So how do I think about equipping my kids to be successful in that future? And it has very little to do with rote learning skills. It has very little to do with any of the sort of reading, writing, arithmetic kind of skills. And it does, as we've been talking about, it's all almost entirely about emotional intelligence and critical thinking, curiosity. And one framework that sort of, for me, creates a real sense of urgency around it is if you do believe that technology is going to continue to progress exponentially, and you do believe that the capabilities of automation and robotics and AI are going to eventually replace or complete tasks far better than we can. And I'll suggest that there are no physical tasks on some time horizon, whether it's 30, 50, let's say 100 years from now. I'm pretty certain that all physical tasks will be done better by automation and robots than humans. Safer, faster, cheaper, and less stressful. Also, most cognitive tasks eventually will probably be better served with technology. And the fear that concept brings out in most of us is deep, and it's a scary thought. And I actually don't think it has to be. Actually, I think it is one of these extremely liberating moments if we think about the empowerment that these technologies can bring to us and what we can then focus on if technology can provide a lot of the basics. And I personally think long-term, the concept of jobs that you have to do to survive go away entirely. And we shift into this Star Trek future where, and again, let's just say it's 1,000 years from now. Like, what are humans doing 1,000 years from now? I think humans have an amazing future 1,000 years from now, and it's going to be more and more technologically engaged, but we're not doing jobs. We're engaging in endeavors. And my 3 E's here that sort of point around what the future endeavors that humanity will always be working in are around empathy. So those things that we want to do between people and amongst humans. Obviously, technology will be wrapped in it, but there's still going to be those things that I want to do with other humans. And those are not what doctors do, but more what nurses do, right? So I'm short on doctors and long on nurses. because that's the human side, the emotional side. The next one is entertainment. So having fun, being creative, being innovative. We're always going to be there because that's just, I think, how our brain is structured. And the third is around exploration. And not just exploration of the seas or space, but the big questions that I think humanity is uniquely wired to ask and be passionate about trying to solve, which are, why are we here? What else is there? What is this connection between us? And those are exciting questions that I don't think have answers. And we can go to the depths of those for a long time coming and have better and better tools to help us along that way. So if you accept my view of the 1,000-year future of humanity and the endeavors that we're going to continue to be passionate about exploring, what are the skills there that are going to be required? Because AI is going to know how to do all the engineering and material science and all that stuff. I just have to be curious and passionate about finding questions that I want to solve, and then know how to use those technologies to solve it, and find the right network of people that can work with me to move forward. So I'm fascinated by seeing how education is going to evolve over the next 20 years. And I think this conversation for me is sort of bullet center point of where education has to shift to. And I think all the thread on the chat, it's all about how do we bring emotional intelligence and emotional understanding more into our lives and more into our learning systems. So again, I'm personally delighted that I got to be part of this. So thank you for including me, everybody. And I look forward to continuing the conversations.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
I do have one question that I know we have 6 minutes left, and I'm really curious. Does anyone have any thoughts on emotional intelligence in regards to gender? Since we do believe in allies and bringing our full self, and everyone plays a role in building an equitable world. Like, I think it's very common to believe like women are more prone to be emotional and bringing that emotion to work. But what about men and other genders? Just curious, just putting the question out there.
Can I jump in first, Stacy?
Sure, go ahead.
I think that the reason too it was so powerful when Rob said you can cry at work and has cried at work is because as a sort of societal norm, at least in the United States, there is, I think, a sort of conditioning that men should be strong, and there's this sort of view of masculinity where tears are nowhere near that view. And for men especially, there's this sort of expectation that you suppress your emotion, you're calm, you're steady, you are, a very level-headed leader who shows no real emotion, especially tears. Or if you do feel emotion, it's anger, and people are, wow, that's powerful. And I think it's just a stereotype, honestly. I think it's just a societal norm. I don't think there's anything ultimately different between men and women around our ability to perceive and express emotion. We feel everything deeply. We perceive and think things in our own unique ways, also depending on whatever gender expression or identity you have, not just men and women. But I think that it's more around the societal norms of what's appropriate to do for men. And I think leaders like Rob and others saying it's okay to cry as men is how we're going to change these perceptions. So it's super important to just be breaking down the barriers and having the conversations of, hey, just because you're this, that, or the other gender, it doesn't mean that you have to show up in any certain way as you may have been told before or programmed in some ways to believe.
Yes.
That's just my take, but curious what others think.
+1, Molly.
Yeah, and Molly, I'll just say, I think you're giving me far, far, far too much credit here. So I appreciate it, but I think I did not create the culture. You, Stacy, and the rest of the folks here really created that space. So thank you for that. And directly on this question, I think the long arc of humanity is probably going to show, gender fluidity is I don't want to say inevitable because nothing is inevitable, but it's clear that there is a brilliant, beautiful spectrum, and that spectrum is going to get even more brilliant and broad. And so being able to recognize and appropriately include that spectrum, I think is what we're going to have to figure out how to learn to utilize. And because I think all the norms are radically shifting. Of course, you know, there are cultures that are holding strong. There are forces pushing back in reaction, which is very normal, right? It's just sort of the change. That's the natural change process. But I think long term, in the history of humanity, we will see it continue to blend in pretty exciting ways.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think that I think there are plenty of men who have high levels of emotional intelligence, and I've met plenty of women who don't. And so I think it's I think much of this around emotions, emotional intelligence, how to be happy, how to understand purpose and meaning. I think these are all skills, and as soon as we start to realize that these are trainable skills, then we can actually get busy, you know, getting the skills, the ability to access the training for the skills distributed broadly through the population so that anyone who wants to come along can.
Any last thoughts? Great. Well, I just really want to take the time to say thank you. As Rob mentioned, we are having what we call Win Week. So as I mentioned, we launched as a Global Women's Initiative about a year ago. We've been kind of working behind the scenes, and now we're actually going public today. So we have a landing page on the website. It's su.org/WIN. And anyone who follows SU should be getting an email shortly to announce that. And so it's been a huge week. This is our second event of the week. Yesterday, we had a self-care fair. Today, we had our Exponential Equity Webinar. Tomorrow, we're hosting an ally circle with everyone here internally. And we're having a happy hour on Thursday. And then we're bringing a full circle with what we're calling Win the Next Circle on Friday. We're just having people share with us any aha moments, any reflections, any commitment to the WIN values. So it's just been a pleasure to have you all on our website, on our webinar, because it's a pretty big week for us.
Yeah. Thanks to each and every one of you for joining us, and to our incredible, brilliant panelists. This was such a rich discussion. I'm just filled with joy and honestly just gratitude that we had this conversation today. And for those of you in the comments saying, what about my country, or I want to do this more, like, that's amazing. We would love that. Please join WIN, and let's continue this conversation and see how you can scale more equity in your countries, and let's join forces. That's really what it's all about.
Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Great job, Molly.
Bye, everybody.
Great job,
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
And we'll send you this recording as an email as well, and more resources. So stay tuned.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks all.